Welcome to the next episode of the Assembly Line podcast, the place where industrial businesses come to tell their story and give you the tools you need to becoming an authority within your industry. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by David Lynch, whose entrepreneurial started from his spare bedroom in 2009. David scaled Lynch Healthcare Group, a manufacturing exporter, until his exit during the pandemic in 2020. Since exiting his venture in 2020, David has focused on M&A, targeting businesses in construction, engineering, and other related sectors, aiming to elevate companies and their revenues over about $5 million. But at his heart, David's a family man and shares his life with his wife and three sons, which we felt embodied the balance between professional success and also personal fulfillment. David, so great to have you on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, guys. Really looking forward to it.
Brilliant. So David, just to get us started, we always like to understand a bit more about kind of what shaped you to the person that you are today. So give us an overview of your professional journey so far and where did it all begin?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll go back as far as school because I didn't do very well. Did okay. And I remember leaving school and pretty much everything we were getting advised was to get a job. There was a lot of manufacturing in the area with the likes of Nissan and big businesses. And the apprenticeship route seemed to be the way to go. I really struggled to get an apprenticeship. I remember failing all of the, the sort of different tests that you do, all the arithmetic tests, etc. And all my mates were getting offered positions. I failed the one at Nissan, and I eventually got an apprenticeship. By luck, really, somebody pulled out, and yeah, I did an engineering apprenticeship, which to be honest, I didn't really enjoy. I really struggled with it. For anyone who knows me, I'm useless with my hands and can't even change a light bulb. So yeah, I'm not the best with that. But then that company was closing down, and I embarked on a career in sales, started a sales role. I got told that I was too shy and not outgoing enough for sales. Managed to convince them to give me another 3 months trial. I got that. And I worked my way up in that company over about a 6 or 7 year period. And then, as all entrepreneurs do, you start thinking, well, I can do this. I can do this for myself. And those were the thoughts I had. I had a young family on the way. It was quite a big risk because by that time I was getting paid a decent salary. But yeah, I decided I was going to set my own company up in a similar sector to where I was working. So 2009, difficult time to start a business, a recession. And fast forward 11 years, I sold that in 2020 in a pandemic. So I tend not to do things the easy way.
Exactly that. Wow, I mean, what a journey. And it's interesting what you said earlier in terms of these like numerical and reasoning tests. I think Joe and I had a fair share, a bit of experience with those, and it didn't turn out well either. So here we are now. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear, especially in the going back in the early days. How would you personally define almost like success? And how would you say that's changed across the years?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Quite the sort of early doors in my sort of career in setting up the business. Somebody once said sort of, success is whatever you want it to be. But the way that I interpret that is, for me, I always say now, it's setting a goal and achieving that. And that's whether you just want to lose a couple of pounds, a couple of stone in weight, you want to go to the gym or active, whatever it is you want to do, I think that's success. Like if I look back to my upbringing, that my dad's success was just to go to work, pay the bills, and allow us a decent life. And that's what he did. So for me, success is setting yourself a goal, a target, and achieving it. And to be honest, it's the same today, and it's what I say to entrepreneurs if I'm mentoring them. Whatever you want to achieve, if you set a goal to achieve it and you do achieve it, I think that's success.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think, I don't know if you agree, David, but it almost leans quite heavily into the idea that the sort of the process is something to be enjoyed as well. So for example, for those people that have, okay, I want to have 2 million quid in the bank, I want to have this, I want to have that, like almost these really long-term sort of life goals or ambitions as such. You look at those and you think, okay, like once I've achieved those, that I'll be happy and life will be good. But I think what you're almost indicating there is almost those like smaller goals. I want to lose a few pounds, I want to do whatever, that you can kind of enjoy the milestones or the points in between. Is that kind of where, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think well, a really good example, when I set the business up, I was 29-year-old, and I set myself a target to be sold by the time I was 40. And a nice little story is, well, I missed out by a month, basically. I was supposed to be selling when I was still 40 on the 28th of September, and the deal was supposed to be going through, and I was like, I've done it. And anyway, it sort of ended up being the end of October, so all of that, I was a bit gutted in that respect. But yeah, so I said, look, I want to sell by the time I'm 40, but of course you need to work back over, and you need to set yourself like mini chunks, mini targets. And one of the things I always did was set quarterly targets and quarterly goals rather than annually. But all of my goals were to work towards that target, selling the company when I was 40. I didn't know how I was going to do it, honestly, but I managed, so stumbled through it.
So it sounds like those pesky solicitors and lawyers got in the way of that.
I'm not just forgetting
dream. Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear some of maybe like the key lessons you've learned along the journey, because obviously setting so many goals and maybe setting like wide goals and long-term goals and short-term goals, that comes with a lot of experience in terms of how you can manage that in the most effective way. Because I know personally some people that would have been too ambitious and set like long-term goals, and then they don't focus on what they actually need to do to get there. And then on the other side, you've got people that look at 1 month ahead, but don't think of the big picture and where they almost want to end up. So it'd be good to hear from your experience a bit about that in terms of how you tackled goals, how that kind of came about for you to have the best way of doing that there.
Yeah, I think for me, the first thing is like surrounding yourself with good people and having a mentor. I didn't really get myself a mentor until sort of mid through my journey. Whether I was young and confident and thought I could do it myself, but I read a quote a few years ago, and it's something like, the most expensive thing in your business journey is the information you don't know. And I thought, God, that is so true. Like, because you carry on, you make mistakes, you make costly mistakes. I made multiple costly mistakes. But if I had a mentor at those times that had been there and done it and made them mistakes, I probably would have got there a little bit quicker, and I probably wouldn't have made that costly mistake. So getting a mentor, being around good people that have done it, that are better than you, I think is critical. And I think the other thing which kind of goes in hand with that is sort of riding the waves. You have good times and you have bad times. And when we had good times, I really sort of pushed that forward like 100 miles an hour. And some people say, you know, I guess it was quite risky because we could have could have come and bit us in the bum. But once we got that bit of success and we were on a bit of a roll, we won a few contracts. I just went for it, and that's where I would say again to people that are maybe a little bit more cautious. Yeah. I think you've got to go for it. You've got to make a big difference, and you've got to challenge yourself. So yeah, I think they're my two areas that I would say.
Yeah, that's really I think that idea of like momentum really resonates with Andreas and I, especially at the moment, really, where you almost, it's like a snowball effect, isn't it? Right, where you have like a few successes, they might even be a few lucky things that just come in, but in fact that gives you the kind of momentum and drive, and almost like probably belief is another element of that you can tackle some of these larger things that if you thought you would be doing at the beginning, you'd have laughed and kind of hid in the corner. You know, you wouldn't have thought that you could tackle them. So yeah, I get that entirely. That makes complete sense. In terms of how you got through those maybe trickier times and maybe those obstacles, how did you make sure that you could almost ride those highs and lows? Like, what were you almost telling yourself when things became more difficult to make sure that you could keep pushing forward and get back to more of those highs? Because the lows are inevitable, right? What are kind of some of the conversations you were having with yourself and maybe even your team to make sure that those were moving on and moving forward?
I think just having that, I think entrepreneurs have that natural ability, or a lot of entrepreneurs, to dust themselves down and go again. And like the amount of times I was thinking, what am I doing? I can't do this. You know, and you just wake up the next morning and just something goes, right, I'm not going to be beaten. And you go again and you push forward, and you walk into the office, all like, this is how we're going to do it. Well, the reality is, you've probably had a night of no sleep, constantly worry about, how are you going to pay the next bills and stuff like that. But there's just something in me that I'm very competitive as well. I don't like getting beat. So I just, it was a case of going again on so many occasions.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. It's almost like you might be going through a hard time, you might get a little bit tired, especially for me, and then you have maybe a day's rest or a couple of hours of rest, and then that fire just lights up again, and it's like, let's go, let's tackle the problems. One area that I find quite interesting, and I'd like to get your thoughts on, is what you said earlier in terms of the importance of having like a mentor, someone that you can trust and almost bounce ideas off and guide you towards that right direction. How do you go about finding a good mentor? What would be your advice in terms of people looking for a mentor in their business?
I think being part of communities. I'm a part of a lot of communities now, and there was sort of groups in the northeast of England. For example, one still is called the Entrepreneurs Forum. So I was part of the Entrepreneurs Forum, and one of the great things about that was, whatever you were having a challenge in, whether you were looking to raise finance, whether you were having people problems, challenges, and you would just speak to them and say, look, this is me challenge, and they would buddy you up with somebody who is good in that area, and that's really good. But of course, with technology now, with LinkedIn, and I think it's just reaching out to people and finding somebody who you think suits your personality, because that's more important than anything else. There's lots of people who've done really good things, but you need to be able to get on with them, and you need to actually enjoy that partnership.
Yeah, I get that. I get that completely. I think Andreas and I have, over our time in kind of the space, we've developed a number of really nice, like mutually beneficial relationships with people that I think now we would probably call mentors. And over literally recent weeks or months, we've brought additional people in who maybe it's very much more of like a paid relationship, but almost it's very much still focused on that idea of shortening the time frame that it takes you to get from A to B by learning those lessons that someone else has already had. Like the value of that is, I would say, pretty profound actually. And there's nothing more valuable than the time that you have. So if it can save you a couple of years, then that it's worth so much value. David, I know there's another topic that you're particularly passionate about or focused on in business, after kind of working both through the healthcare group and so on. It is leadership, and I'd be really interested to hear more about your approach to leadership, particularly within the business that you previously operated in, and any of your kind of like beliefs or practices that you think are particularly important to have as a leader in business.
Yeah, I think it's a really good subject, because when you first start your business and you're employing your first few members of staff, and for quite a period after that, what you are is you're a manager. You become a manager of people, and most entrepreneurs have never been a manager before, and I think that's a really important skill set, and it's something that I really, really struggled with. The management of people. First of all, I didn't have any experience, but I just really struggled with it. And I think as the business grew, and I then didn't have to be the manager of many people, I think that's where I realized there's a big difference between a leader and a manager. And I think it's impossible. I'd love to hear somebody else's view, but I think it's impossible to lead a team and manage a team at the same time. I found that very difficult, and I think, but what did stand us in good stead is, I think, a natural ability to influence others, and speak to people at different levels. When I grew up, it was a difficult time. Family didn't have loads of money to spend. We did the basics, a holiday once a year, but and I grew up in an area where there wasn't a lot of wealth, so that stood me in good stead to be able to speak to people on all different levels. Whether I was going out in the early days and doing a product assessment in somebody's house, or where then I'd sort of have me shirt and tie in the back of the van, and I'd go and speak to the manager of the NHS in procurement, and I found myself able to do that. But to sort of finish off on that, sort of, I think, create win-win, like that's something I've learned more so recently, that whatever you're doing in life, it has to be win-win. Because I think when I had my business, I focused too much on what was in it for us. If you think about suppliers, trying to get the very, very best deal that suited me and our company, when actually it was never going to have a long-term relationship, because it worked for us and it didn't really work for them. So creating win-win is massive. I always look to try and make sure the other person's getting out of the relationship is just as much, if not more, a bit more than me now.
That's a really powerful point. There's something that I just want to pick up on there, which is, you mentioned about kind of the differences between leaders and managers. And I think for me, like the leader role, you've obviously got that long-term vision, you've got that clear direction and guidance about the almost like where that momentum as a business is going to be placed. How would you define the differences, and really to help us understand the characteristics that you see as important from each of those roles? And I think, as you say, sometimes they're massively different, and sometimes even contrasting in their approach. Like a leader doesn't always make a good manager, and a manager doesn't always make a good leader. So how would you kind of separate the two and break those down?
I think with a manager, you need to be really good at your people skills, and you need to be good at understanding different personalities. And yeah, I didn't even know anything about that, and didn't even know it existed. And B, I didn't really value that going forward enough. So, whereas I would say, like, a leader, as you say, you maybe chair like a monthly meeting with all the team. You explain what the vision is, how we're going to get there, the challenges. From a high level, you can congratulate the team and encourage the team without being that person that has to have a word with somebody, when they're not performing. That's why I think it's impossible. And this isn't an area I know loads about, so this is just my own personal sort of viewpoint. There's probably loads that somebody else could add on this subject, but in its very basic form, I think you have to be detached from the day-to-day to be a good leader.
Yeah.
Certainly what I've found.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think from my perspective, I completely agree. And I think, I don't know if you guys see that as well, but in terms of a manager, it's more suitable, let's say, when you have a team where, they're growing their skills, they're not at that top level of ability in their role, let's say. And I feel like once you have a very, very strong team in terms of they know exactly what needs to be done and they've got the best abilities to do that, then almost that leadership role can shine more.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that in your experience, David.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I created a management structure in the business, I found it a lot easier to sort of lead that team, a very small team. And I think that was because those people were selected correctly, and they just took ownership, and they, you didn't need to go into any detail. And I think that's where I'd struggled when I did. So having the more like-minded people around, I was able just to sort of lead and encourage that senior management team without having to really tell them what to do at all, because they were better than me, and that's why I brought them in. But so it was just more I think that's probably a good example of a leadership aspect.
Yeah. That's a huge point. I think something that you mentioned there resonates massively, which is the idea of like selecting people that are better than you in certain areas. I think that's a really great, characteristic of a great leader. Is there anything else that you look for when selecting people from your team for your team? Like, were there any key traits or characteristics that you would spot within an interview and you thought to them, you'd make a great fit there?
Decision makers, like, number one, that they need to demonstrate that they are good, decisive decision makers. Because, as I said, I didn't want to be the person that's making all of the decisions in the business, because when I got out and when I sold, I didn't want it to rely on me at all. So yeah, I think decision makers, and that skill set, that area of expertise, systems and processes, financial reporting, financial analysis wasn't my skill set, so I needed somebody to come in and do that. And I touched it on a little bit earlier, ownership, taking ownership. I think it's a massive, massive thing in a business, and that I found there's a fairly small number of people that were able to come on board and just take ownership of things. So I think that's why we progressed to that next level, having those key people in, but maybe the selection of those people were better based on experience.
Yeah. Would it be a right assumption, though, to say that relies on you as an individual having quite a high level of like almost self-awareness as an entrepreneur working in that business to be able to spot those areas? Because there are so many people out there that have these perceptions of different skills that they have or different ways that they work, or they just don't have an accurate reflection of their own strengths and weaknesses. So would you say that that's been important for your career so far, having that level of self-awareness to be able to say, look, I don't run well with numbers, or I don't run well with the financial reporting side of things. Let's bring someone else in for that.
Yeah, you've hit on a really good point there. And I would say it's a self-awareness, but it's managing your own emotions. Again, it's something I really struggle with most of the business, but certainly more in the early days. And I didn't sort of handle my own emotions in the right way, which created, created a little bit of chaos at times, I would say. So understanding yourself and understanding how to manage your emotions better was the key in the end, was the key to getting sort of out of the business day to day. And since I sold, I've spent a lot of time in the last 3 years on personal development.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. I'm sure it was just like the way that the business progressed and kind of the lessons that you learned through it. But was there anything specific during that time working in a business that you would say that you did to help yourself as an individual, like spot those gaps? Is there any, did you work with any coaches? Obviously, you mentioned the mentor. Like, was there any key points that allowed you to really spot what those strengths and weaknesses are, or would you just attribute it to your growth as an individual through that development of the organization?
Yeah, I think I worked with like a coach that specialized in sort of people and personalities. And when we were doing the interviews, we would bring that kind of system into the business to ask the right questions, to really try and determine the character of that person coming into business. Because when you go into a small business, it's very, very different working in a big corporate. And some of the best people I work with in the corporate side might have been customers. When I try to bring them into my business, they didn't always cope, because you couldn't just pick the phone up and ask for IT. It's a very different animal working in a small business. So I think it's identifying the characteristics of those people and the personality traits, and then that gives you a better starting point.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's a huge difference between small and obviously those bigger businesses. What would be one piece of advice you would give to a leader, let's say in a small to medium sized business looking to do that next step, looking to scale, essentially?
I think with all the points I've covered, really, you need to surround yourself with them good people, whether it's a mentor or a coach, but bringing the people into the business, because you can't do everything, and you're probably creating more chaos than you realize. Like typical entrepreneurs like me, you just try and solve problems for the customers, and I didn't really care how we solve the problem as long as we solve the problem for the customers. But in the background, I was going, yeah, we've won this order, we've got to deliver it by tomorrow. It was creating chaos in the background. So you need to have these people around you that go, hang on a minute, if you're going to do this, we're going to have to put this system and process in place. So you've got to bring them people in with a skill set that you don't have. And otherwise, you probably lose your customers and lose your staff.
Do you know what? I love that you've mentioned that chaos element as well, because I think what we underestimate is that almost as entrepreneurs, we like revel in chaos. We like a chaotic environment. We thrive in chaos. But the reality is most people don't. Most people, it makes people feel frustrated. It makes people feel on edge. It makes, and it doesn't create a sort of a conducive environment to like working at maximum efficiency. So I think, I get that entirely. There's often situations where 1 week I might kind of bring a couple of deals up to the table with Andreas that we've brought in, and Andreas is obviously supporting the team delivering the work, and maybe I've done that without checking capacity in the way that I should have, and things like that. And it does create its own challenges, but awareness over those is really really paramount. So I appreciate bringing that to light, David. Really good point.
I think
Um,
that just before you, that ties into the last point about um, having the good people around you. And you know, a lot of what we did in the early days relied on humans and decisions, and the best will in the world, everybody makes mistakes. So your business only becomes as good as how many human errors you make or how many mistakes you make. So by putting the systems in, just took away all the human error. And
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think that's such a good point. And like, also there, the idea of systems and processes and limiting almost the human error, I think is absolutely key. And with what we have access to in the current day and age, it's relatively easy to do from like a technical standpoint. It's just obviously the process of kind of doing it and getting your head around it. Um, Obviously now I understand you're doing a bit of work in the kind of M&A space, and you're working with almost what I would call like industrial brands within that type of sector. As a business at Solvay, we work solely with industrial businesses, from construction to manufacturing to industrial supplies. I'd be really interested to hear your outlook on what the future of that space looks like, whether it be from a sales and marketing perspective or anything else that you would have to note in terms of the future of these like kind of traditionally quite like gritty, quite raw industrial sectors that we have in the UK. Where do you think they're heading? What might that high level outlook look like? And any kind of thoughts that you have there, really.
Yeah, I think obviously technology is going to play a huge part. I can't say I'm an expert in that area, but obviously AI is going to play a big part in life, in business. And it just reminds us a little bit about social media when that first came in. And I remember like 2009, we were trying to embrace that before anybody else. I remember like our competitors were going, "What you doing? You can't use Facebook for this sort of industry." And what is nice is, I follow a lot of like industrial manufacturing business on LinkedIn, business owners, and they have really tried to embrace the technology. They're using video, they're using YouTube, and they are trying to embrace it. So I think it's important that people continue to do that. And, I think that'll play a big part and determine the winners from the losers almost. And focusing on your brand. I've seen more companies do that now, which is great because, it's a lot more than just your logo, and it's something I'm passionate about. So I think combining technology with your brand and your brand values, getting them foundations in place, I think no matter what the industry, you're gonna succeed.
Yeah. And it's that element as well around like when you mention brand there, it's that element of like, of course we want to be attracting customers to our brand, but something that people rarely consider is like the team and the culture that we're trying to build as well, and like how you look from the outside. As we know at the moment, it's very much a kind of a candidates market, an employees market, where businesses are struggling to source that talent. And I think one of the ways or one of the approaches they can use is really like differentiating themselves and making themselves more attractive as such online.
Yeah, I think if you get your marketing right, it attracts customers, but it also attracts good people. And I'm a firm believer in that, because if you're constantly putting out the right stuff, the right messages, people naturally want to be a part of that journey.
Yeah.
And that's what I found in my business, and it's what I encourage other entrepreneurs to do, to have a focus with their marketing on attracting talent.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant,
Yeah,
brilliant point.
that's very interesting because even though, it's getting more and more competitive now in the industrial space, like we said, like they're using marketing strategies, they're using new channels to reach customers. There's also that almost like people problem in terms of getting good talent into these businesses and continuing it onwards. So in terms of making sure that these industrial businesses are acquiring new talent, they're getting the best that they can in the market, because a lot of the young generation now is just not attracted to this type of industry. They want the flashy stuff, the TikTok videos, all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's almost, how do we make sure we can protect the industry by getting in as much people as possible?
Yeah. So I think that the marketing, but the brand side of that, your brand foundations, I think showing that you're trying to make the customer's life as easy as possible.
Yeah.
And just, I know it sounds really corny and cheesy, but like loving your customers and trying to wow your customers, because I think people naturally will understand that you genuinely are trying to do that. So if you're trying to look after your customers, love your customers, and wow your customers, then it is a very high chance that you're going to do the same for your staff and your people.
Yeah.
And because if that's your core values, then that's what you are. So you're trying to do them things because you think it's the right thing to do in life and in business. So I think that's the secret ingredient.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point. I think that like that alignment of the values through the entirety of the business, is such a key feature, I think. A final question for you then, David, really is, where can people find out more about you? How can people connect with you? How can people follow your journey through this next interesting phase of what you're working on? Let everybody know if you've got a website, LinkedIn. I know you do a bit on YouTube. Feel free to kind of signpost us to where you'd like us to visit you next.
Yeah, so I'm putting a lot of emphasis on LinkedIn. I'm doing a post. I'm trying to do a post every day at 8 o'clock, kind of keep yourself accountable. And I'm trying to mix that up with personal stuff, so people get to know me as a person, some kind of inspiration, some inspiring quotes. And then I'm trying to do at least one post a week where I'm sharing some key parts of my journey. So LinkedIn, I'm also doing the same on Instagram, trying to probably do a little bit more on my personal side on Instagram. I'm building up a really good profile on Instagram. And as you say, YouTube, I just really enjoy, got my own YouTube channel. It's only been going for about a year and a bit, year and a half maybe. And again, I'm trying to combine that with, so people can understand and get to know me as a person. But what I am going to be doing on my YouTube channel over the next sort of 12 months is, so behind the scenes, we are in the process of acquiring some businesses. And I'm going to try and document that best I can on my YouTube channel, like, when we've done the acquisitions, visiting the companies, letting people see, trying to explain what's involved in the process, because I am quite passionate about that. And I only grew my company organically, but I now know how to scale a company strategically via acquisition. So I'm very passionate now about sharing that with other people, because if you can combine that strategic growth with the organic growth, I think it's a game changer. So I'm going to try and document all of that. So Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube channel.
Brilliant. What we'll do, David, is we'll make sure that we add the links to each of those in any sort of description where we can, so people can kind of follow that journey. I know both Andreas and I have been following some of the bits on LinkedIn for some while, and it's done exactly that. There's been some really kind of interesting bits to hear more about your journey. So David, thanks again for joining us. It's been really insightful conversation from our perspective to hear that journey from starting the business, as I say, in a really easy environment in 2009, 2008, 2009, to then selling the business in another really easy business environment, questionably during the pandemic, is a really kind of interesting insight for us. So again, appreciate having you on, and hope to speak soon.
Yeah, no, it's just nice to be part of it and helping me sort of extract some of this knowledge that I've still got in my head. So thanks for the opportunity, guys.